Today, we are going to make some grass. No, I'm not in Colorado, so it's not going to be that kind of grass. It's our techniques that are so simple and sensible, your models will practically build themselves.
Okay, so just a reminder as to what we are doing. I'm trying to replicate sort of this look. This is going to be on a GT500 1968 kit. And I want this kind of look, this kind of a faded purple is what I'm going after. Just a reminder where we left off last time. So we had the base kind of light rust underneath the paint. We have the purplish, the faded purplish color. And then we went over how to kind of scrub some of the paint off so that it looks like it's worn off. So now we are going to move on to the next piece. So being a Shelby model, this has a fiberglass hood, fiberglass nose piece. It has a fiberglass trunk lid. So I'm going to have to replicate that. Now those aren't metal, so they don't rust. And they put rust on this. So yeah, what I'm going to have to do is mask this off. I'm going to paint all of these areas with a Tamiya flat white. I'm going to mix up some of that white glue mixture that we used earlier, dab it on certain areas on here. And then we're going to use the next color. And see this side, remember, I didn't do in our last video. So I've gone ahead and sprayed it with that purple, but I've gone ahead and used some of that chipping fluid, as I call it. And I've painted my vents and scoops and the front valence and the rear valence. They're all now painted with a kind of a light blue color, and then I went over it with that purple, and you'll see why in a few minutes. And you can see here where some of the areas are that have the chipping fluid underneath them. Now there's a reason I wanted to go with this kind of a light blue underneath. Here we are. After I've done my scrubbing technique, you can see that kind of a bluish gray underneath the purple, and then of course the white fiberglass underneath that. And I wanted to replicate that purple like we had talked about earlier, but I wanted it to look like it had been sprayed over a car that was already kind of a Brittany blue color. So one thing I like to do with my junk cars, or should I say junker cars, is I like to take a panel, a fender, a door, something like that, and make it a completely different color. Like it had been damaged, somebody was going to start doing restoration work and just kind of stopped. This car, I don't want it to look like it was in a junkyard or stripped. I want it to look like it was in a field and somebody was starting their restoration. You can see I've put my scoops on, and they have retained the paint pretty well because the fiberglass usually does. Just like the trunk lid, just like the hood, has a lot more paint on it. Which quite often, if you see some old junker cars with fiberglass parts, the paint seems to stick to those better. And obviously you don't have the surface rust because it's fiberglass. So for this next step, I'm going to use my Dremel tool. You could use a different bit, like a grinding, I forget what these are called. You could use something like that, which is fine. I am going to use this. That's what I have in there, and it'll work just fine. So what we're going to do, these Mustangs, they have a tendency to rust on this part here and back here. So I'm going to go ahead and take this and carefully, as carefully as I can show you, it's going to be difficult to show you, but I'm going to grind this area right here. There we go.
All I'm trying to do is thin out the plastic so that it's thin. I don't want to break all the way through the other side. What I want to do is I want to get it so thin that I can start to see that it's thin right here. Okay. Now I've already started this other side, so we'll show you on this other side. And then what I want to do is I'm going to take a very sharp X-Acto knife and I want to poke through. This is like doing battle damage on an aircraft. So I want to poke through this. It's hard to show you guys other than me just doing it, but put a little bit of pressure, not much, and it's making a couple of holes. And I can twist it and turn it. Make them as big as I want or as little as I want. And there you can see how that's turning out. Now, all I have to do is run the blade over it. To scrape some of that excess plastic off. And you can see how that looks. Now, of course, I can make it bigger or smaller. It just depends. I could also add some here for the purposes of what we're going to do. I'm not going to do that part right now, but we'll move on to the next step. Okay, so on this next step, I'm going to take my rust and I'm going to just take some water, put in here, a little bit too much, and I'm going to use an old brush and I'm going to take some matte Mod Podge. Now you could use PVA glue if you want. This is just how I'm going to do this, is with the Mod Podge. And I'm going to make a very thin paste. And now I'm going to go over where these rust holes are. Kind of wipe it out there. I don't want to cover the holes. So I need to be a little more careful where I put that. A little more precise, I should say. And here on the bottom. And I am going to try and simulate it here. We'll see how this turns out. Again, you can go crazy and really grind some of this back if you want. Just depends on how much of this, quote, cancer you want it to have. And now I'm going to take some of my rust and just put it on here. You can see I got quite a bit of it. But that gives you the idea there of how that's going to look. I'm going to go back and I'm going to poke my holes. Once I feel I've got enough rust on here. I'm going to go back through and
find my holes, and I'm going to clean those out a bit. And voila. There you go. Our simulated cancer areas. I'm going to do that on the other side, and we'll come back here in a minute. Okay, so here I've added to just a few areas. A little bit up here. The holes back here. A little bit there. And you do as much or as little as you want, as you feel you are comfortable with. I have used baking soda on this before and then had to dye it with like some white glue, water, and a brown to make it look like rust. And it works okay, but nothing works like real rust. So there you go on that. Right, let's move on to the next. Okay, so I'm going to dull down this chrome a bit, which is always a good idea in these kits, because the chrome is always just a little bit too chromy. But for this purpose, definitely we need to tone some of it down. Now, I was going to use my XF86 flat clear, however, it's empty. Dried up, empty, whatever you want to call it. There's nothing left in there. So for my backup, I'm going to use some of the Testors Dull Coat lacquer. I've got it thinned down with some lacquer thinner already. The first thing I'm going to do is spray the tail piece here. A lot of guys will paint those black, and that's fine, but from the factory these were kind of a silver color. Okay, we're going to dull that down. Just for later on, I'm going to dull down my wheels as well. Give a thin coat to the front bumper and the rear bumper, just to dull it down just a tad. Okay. See if I'm happy yet with my tail pan. Yeah, there we go. Okay, on to the next.
Okay, so here's our body pretty much done, and I want to show some of the other things that I've done off of camera. So I gave a wash to the seam where the door opens and closes. The same with the trunk lid. You will notice on a real car that's how they look. They don't look painted in that little seam there. I've also gone ahead and put a GT500 stripe on it, weathered it up just a little bit. You see this tail piece, how it's nice and like flat aluminum looking. I did have to paint the tail lights and the black area to simulate the gasket and the gap that is around the rear tail lights. You see how this rust looks. Now, one thing I do, looking at this picture, do need to do is go back and scrub some more of the paint off of this rear quarter panel, because it does look like it was sprayed, and I don't want that. You see here I've got the marker lights painted. I've got the mirror dulled up just a little bit. And let's take a good look. So in the grill, I went ahead and blacked that out, and got the front end, whole front end mounted there. You'll see the rear quarter pieces that match up with the trunk lid. You see I've got the Shelby letters all painted. Now, a lot of these would be missing on a car, say in a junkyard, when people go through and pop those kind of things off. But I wanted this to represent one that had really just been sitting out in the sun for quite some time. You'll also notice on the glass here, I went ahead and taped off areas and went ahead and sprayed it with a dull coat to simulate how the glass would look with a lot of dust and whatnot on it, and somebody's like turned on the windshield wipers and wiped that dust away in those areas. So first time I've tried that. One thing I want you to notice is around the windows, around the chrome, I try to simulate the gasket that goes next to the window, and then of course there's your chrome trim around that. So you'll notice there's a thin black line around my windshield, around my rear window, and also around my my side windows. It's just one of those little added details I like to put. Now, I have not put the antenna on this thing yet, so there's a few things that still haven't been done. I did go ahead and give a wash to the Shelby emblems and then hit them with the Molotow chrome. All the chrome that I did on this was with the Molotow liquid chrome. So, hey, thanks for joining us. We'll see you in part 4.